Hello, everyone. That's like the shortest lived banner in the history of the world, but we pop it up just so you know where we are. Hello to everyone hanging out and watching, and welcome to NoVa Teen Night 4. My gosh, I can't believe we're here. I can't believe this is finally happening, and we're on our Thrills and Chills High School High Stakes, which was a name I came up with for this panel and then was really proud of. And we had to stick with it. I am Amanda Quain, and I am the author coordinator for NoVa Teen this year, and I also work at One More Page Books, which is the bookstore sponsoring this festival. We're a small independent bookstore in Arlington, Virginia, and we helped start NoVa Teen in 2014 along with some fabulous librarians. Some of you have attended the festival in past years, which of course is usually an in-person event at Marshall High School in Falls Church. In March of 2020, we had to cancel the festival days before it was scheduled. 2 years ago, 3 days ago, actually. So here we are 2 years later doing sort of a virtual reunion with panels featuring authors who have participated in past festivals and have new books to share, hence NoVa Teen: Homecoming, unrelated to the Spider-Man thing. We're sorry, of course, to miss the magic of an in-person event, but we're just so glad to bring back so many authors who helped make NoVa Teen what it is. I also want to take a second to thank our partners. We have George Mason University's Fall for the Book, Fairfax County Public Library, Loudoun County Public Library, Alexandria Library / Friends of the Beatley Central Library, and Arlington Public Library. This is our last sort of standard panel for the week, and then tomorrow we have our keynote conversation with Julie Murphy, where I got to chat with her and we had an amazing time. And you can see that's scheduled on our website if you haven't checked it out already. And then you can buy signed copies of all of our authors' books from One More Page Books. We're going to have the link for you in the chat. But for now, let's get to the main event. I'm going to talk to these amazing authors about high school, high stakes, thrills, and chills in YA. And then if there's some time at the end, we're going to take some questions from the viewers. So our authors for this evening, we have the amazing, I'm just going to go in order of how I see them on my screen. We have Kayla Ancrum, we have Karen McManus, and we have Sarah Glenn Marsh, all of whom have been on NoVa Teen before and who I absolutely love. So thank you so much, friends, for joining us again this year.
I'm very happy to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So why don't we each start with just you telling us a little bit about your book? We'll start with Kayla again.
Certainly. So Darling is a Peter Pan adaptation. It's a chapter-by-chapter adaptation set in Chicago. It's contemporary. Even though it feels a little bit magical. It is about a Wendy who moves from the suburbs to Chicago. And in the first week that she is there, Peter Pan breaks into her house. And she spends the rest of the night, one single night, running around with him and his friends, all of your favorite characters, the Lost Boys, even the rare ones like Curly and Nibs. And it comes to a twist so twisty that I've been warned that it makes people too stressed out. So I'm kind of like roll it back a little bit.
I love that. It's deeply twisty, but as Kayla and I were discussing earlier, just like the original Peter Pan. So we support it.
Indeed.
Karen, how about you?
Yeah, hi, I'm Karen M. McManus. I wrote the One of Us is Lying series, and I also write standalone mysteries. And my latest is, let me see if I get the right hand. There we go.
There you
You'll
go.
Be the Death of Me over the shoulder. It is the story of 3 estranged friends who skip school and get caught up in a crime involving one of their classmates. I like to call it Ferris Bueller's Day Off meets a murder mystery. And it also takes place in a single day, not night like Kayla's, but within a very short time frame.
Maybe like it's the same world, and like in the day, You'll Be the Death of Me happens, and then like that night, it just even keeps going.
We'll do a crossover next time.
Perfect. Sarah?
All right. So I don't quite have my book behind me. I mean, I have book covers. Maybe you can see it. It's so dark up there. But I'm Sarah Glenn Marsh, and I wrote The Girls Are Never Gone. That is my latest book. Normally I write fantasy, but I've taken a break from that. And The Girls Are Never Gone is actually a good old-fashioned ghost story. It is about a YouTuber and podcaster who decides to do something new for the summer by trying to debunk the haunting at an old estate. She volunteers to help renovate the place and gets a lot more than she bargained for.
Sarah's book, by the way, is the scariest book I've ever read. That's admittedly, I don't read scary books. I one time threw away. Well, when I was a child, I read the Frankenstein Wishbone adaptation and got so scared I threw the book away. So like my
Whoa.
levels are low, but I was really glad that I pushed through my fears and read it because it's great.
What, you deserve a trophy. I love it.
Thank you. So as our panel name implies, all of your books have very high stakes, sometimes over the course of one very stressful day, whether it's murders or hauntings, just ending up in situations that you cannot find your way out of. So I'd love to hear what sort of drew you to writing that genre of book. We'll snake around. Sarah, if you want to start.
Okay. Well, first of all, ghost stories and thrillers are my favorite things to read. So it sort of felt like an inevitability that I would finally contribute something to the genre. I mean, that's what I love to consume. I know as I've gotten older and as I've gotten more busy as a reader, I need high stakes to keep my attention. Like that's the way to guarantee that I'm going to breeze through something in just a couple hours. So it's what I love to read. And it was really fun to try to put my own spin on some beloved things.
I love that. And to be fair, your fantasies have some spookiness to them too.
I love horror.
Yeah.
I just love horror.
Karen, what about you?
Well, I've been publishing young adult thrillers since 2017, so this is my thing now, but it wasn't always. When I first started trying to write again seriously, which was something I'd only ever done as a kid, the first thing I tried to write was dystopian because I was really inspired by the Hunger Games. And then I learned that nobody was buying dystopian. And also, I'm really bad at world building. So that just didn't work at all. But I did try to do like contemporary fantasy after that because I still hadn't quite figured out what I was good at. And then I got the idea for One of Us is Lying. And it was intimidating at first because I'd never written a mystery. I'd also never written multi-POV. And I had this, vision in my head that it would be 4 narrators. And I thought, well, this is either going to be a disaster or it'll be great. And luckily it went well. So that I felt like I sort of found, the creative space that really worked for me and where I love to be.
I love that. It kind of feels like that a little bit that like Mean Girls meme where it's like raise your hand if you've been personally victimized by publishing not buying dystopian when it was all you wanted to write.
Really should have Googled that before I sat down and wrote like 60,000 words, but live and learn.
Yeah, everything is circular. Maybe one day we'll get the Karen McManus dystopian fantasy Hunger Games.
So bad. Nobody wants that.
Kayla, what about you?
It's going to sound weird to say, but I'm mostly inspired by film when it comes to my own writing. All of my books are designed in a way where it becomes really obvious when you read it. They're all designed to be shotgunned in one sitting. They're very quick reads, very short chapters, I've gotten away with submitting like a $38,000 manuscript that they took and were like, that's okay, which is rare. And I really, really like that feeling when you're watching a movie, a thriller especially, where it feels like you're being held hostage to your chair to like be sucked into that world, and the like eventual like let go of the tension is really, really fun for me, and I really enjoy that. So when I was writing Darling, I really wanted to have that experience, that like slow climb where you're like, things seem normal, but the vibes are just rancid. Yeah. Like, oh, and then when you finally realize why you felt that way, that like explosion of like, oh my God, like feels very cinematic. So that's why I wrote that.
I love that. I feel like slow climb and then you realize things are just wildly off is like the Kayla Ancrum brand.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this seems nice. Oh, it's not nice. Never mind. So all of your books draw inspiration from super interesting places. Karen, you described your book as Ferris Bueller's Day Off with Murder, which is just a wildly interesting and super cool comp. Kayla, your book is the darkest retelling of Peter Pan I've ever read, and I have read them all. It's a compliment. And Sarah, you based the hauntings in your book off of your family's real house, which is both amazing and horrifying all at the same time. What made you choose those inspirations, and what was it like to work with those frameworks in mind? Karen, we can start with you.
Yeah, it's funny. I was on tour in 2017 for One of Us is Lying, and I always described it as the Breakfast Club with murder. And I was on this panel, and the other panelists were joking with me that I should just add murder to all the 80s movies, like 16 Candles with murder, Pretty in Pink with murder. And I don't remember if we actually mentioned Ferris Bueller, but I do remember thinking, okay, that would actually work, because that starts with people doing something that they shouldn't be doing. And that is a good jumping off point for my type of book. But I didn't know what it meant. You know, it was just a hook, really. And I filed it away in the back of my head for literal years until I had finished The Cousins. It's like, okay, now what? What about that Ferris Bueller thing I thought about? And so I sort of pulled that out of the vault and started thinking how, you know, I really wanted it to take place in a day, but how can you get like growth and a mystery in a single day? And it took a while to figure that out. That was probably the biggest block point for me, is getting past that. And once I felt like I had an entry point into making it meaningful in such a short time, then I was off and running.
Yeah, because forgive me if I'm misremembering, but this is your only book with like such a condensed timeline, right?
Yeah, usually it's, I would say, you know, around a month or so is about the time frame at minimum.
Yeah, a more typical mystery and murder based solving timeline, I think, but speaks to the skill that you pulled it off so spectacularly.
Thank you.
Kayla?
My experience with Peter Pan is a little bit interesting. I read it when I think I was like 10 or something. So that was like the golden age of like Harry Potter, unfortunately, and, you know, the series of unfortunate events. And I just found it all dusty in the corner on the floor in my elementary school classroom. And I picked it up and I spun through it and I was like, this is okay, adventure, whatever. And then in college, I was like, you know what, let me pick it up and read it. You know, I'm in the library, my phone is dead. Like, let's get it started. And the experience of reading it as a child versus the experience of reading it as an adult, night and day. Completely night and day. So I did a bunch of research into it, and I plot my book when I was in college. So it was like 2013. And so I did some research on it, and the way that it was written is kind of a little bit similar to Neil Gaiman's Coraline, in so much as it is designed to be read by an adult to a child, with a child experiencing one book and an adult experiencing another, where the child is reading an adventure story and the adult is reading a horror story with incredibly visible danger signs, which is so cool. So I was like, I want to write a book that changes nothing in so much as it illuminates the aspects of the book that are unchanged and horrifying in the way that they already exist. Yeah. And, you know, the character of Peter Pan is a character that is incredibly beloved. We think of him as kind of like a puckish, you know, guy character, a potential romantic interest. But the experience of reading the original Peter Pan, and at the end where he, you know, comes back to visit Wendy, and Wendy's an adult and her daughter is there, and he is like predating on the child and doesn't remember her at all, like literally made my blood run cold. And I was like, I need to make this as very clear as possible for this book. So that's why I did that.
I love that. Well, because what was I don't have my copy in front of me, but the epigraph that you used at the beginning of it.
Oh, yes.
That sets it up very well.
I can. So I pulled 2 quotes from the original book, because usually when I do these panels, I'm like, Peter Pan's a murderer, and everyone's like, no, he's not. So I wanted to like actually put the proof here. So in the original text, it says, the boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers, according as they get killed, and so on. When they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. And then there's another quote, just in case that one is misinterpreted. It says, he often went out alone, and when he came back, you were never absolutely certain whether he had had an adventure or not. He might have forgotten it so completely that he said nothing about it. And then when you went out, you found the body. And on the other hand, he might say a great deal about it, and yet you could not find the body. Yeah. So I tried my best.
When I was reading, I'm like, okay, I know what I'm getting myself into here. Check. And but Sarah, you have even more real than that, a real life horrifying, haunting, conjuring scenario in your life. Tell us about that.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I've always loved ghost stories, but it made the most sense to sort of, you know, base my ghost story, base this haunted house on the only haunted house that I know, really, which is the Glenn house, which my name is Sarah Glenn. I'm named after their youngest daughter that lived in this house, who was my great-grandmother. And, you know, one day I was out visiting this house. It's a museum, so people can go tour it. And I was having dinner there. They were hosting our family. And this volunteer says to me, I can't go in there alone. And I was like, excuse me? I'm like, eating a piece of quiche. And I'm like, what? And a bunch of them come over and flock around me and they start telling me, the other day I was cleaning out the carriage house and I looked up and there was just this woman standing on the balcony staring at me, but nobody was in the house. Or they were telling me they've been hit on the head by antique coins, but they don't have coins in the house. They're telling me all these things. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, right then, that was in 2014, but I filed all of that away for a book and had been for a long time because the museum, what would I call her? Like the docent or the president of the house, she will call me and ask me, she'll put me on speaker and ask me to tell my ancestors to leave her alone because sometimes the house locks her out. Or sometimes she's in there and these really heavy doors open by themselves as if to say, please leave. So anyway, that was all the real life perfect tales from these nice volunteers at this museum, which used to be a home in my family, was my inspiration behind The Girls Are Never Gone.
I have two questions. One, how does that woman still work there?
A bunch of them quit, actually. Some of them are really scared. So some of them quit.
The second I heard a weird sound that was like the pipes in the walls, I would have been like, I'm so gone.
So they offered for me to sleep in there on an air mattress, and I'm gonna just let you know, I'm not that cool. I didn't do it. That's asking way too much. I would not have slept.
Yeah, I mean, plus if you're gonna have to sleep in a haunted house, you should have a real bed. You're an adult.
Yes. Also
at least bring in a mattress,
a cot or something. Like we can do better. Did you draw at all on like the specific haunting experiences for the book, or was that more because obviously there's very malicious spirits in your book? Is that sort of malice more spun from your own head, or did you pull some of the like more little things along the way from the house?
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, the malicious part is not my family. So the ghosts that are at that house, it's like my great-great-grandparents, and they were super sweethearts. So that haunting is actually not scary. I mean, it's just, I don't know, dead people are just scary. It's just upsetting. I don't want to look in the mirror and see like a dead lady walking out of the room. Like, no.
It's a good rule.
Some of the smaller elements I did pull like little haunting incidents from the stories that have been shared with me. So for instance, at the Glen House, there was a bell system for calling servants to come to certain rooms. They also had very Hill House, if you've seen Haunting of Hill House on Netflix, the speaking pipes that you could talk into for the different rooms. So I used both of those things, the disconnected bells ringing and sounds through the speaking pipes as some of the little haunting elements.
Nice. Those were very good haunting elements. They spooked me. So when writing thriller or horror, your main characters generally have to be someone who is willing to take a leap into the unknown, whether that's trying to solve a murder, following a stranger out of their window and into the night, or just continuing to investigate a house that is so clearly haunted. I'm wondering if writing that sort of character came easily for you, and if that was similar or different to how you live your own life. I don't think I've started with Karen yet, so we'll dip in there.
I would never be part of a murder. No way, no how. I would be the last person to stick my neck out there. So no. But I enjoy writing people who are a lot more, brave than I am. And I also write multi-POV though. So not everybody is proactive. I like to have a mix of personalities and characters. And there are the people who get stuff done. And then there are the people who are maybe a little bit more thoughtful. And then there are the people who, they're always in conflict with one another. And sometimes that halts their progress because they've got to deal with their interpersonal issues before they can solve this murder. But you do always have to have that one character who's pushing things forward, and they're sort of like the MVP for me of the ensemble, because if they weren't there, nothing would get done.
I love that. I never thought about that, but of course, like, you get to play with those different POVs in that, but not everyone can just be the hanging back reluctant person. Then you have no book. You just have a nice day at high school.
Right. And if everybody's like, go, 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 they're going to butt heads. So you can't have that constant conflict either. They have to complement one another.
Yeah. Sarah, you kind of worked with that a little bit as well. You'll have just the one POV, but Dare and the people around her have very different ideas of how much they should be interacting with these hauntings.
Definitely. And I mean, for myself, I'm definitely a dare. So I wrote from a point of view that was very comfortable for me, which is, although, well, I can't say I'm quite her. She's a lot more like willing to ignore things and a lot calmer about them than I would be. I'm very afraid of the supernatural, even though I'm skeptical and really don't believe it. I still have a very healthy fear of it and would completely stay away. So but I was able to relate to her through her skepticism. So yeah.
Yeah, because that was one of the coolest things about one of the most interesting things about Dare is she's like, I am a ghost hunter, I'm a ghost investigator, but I've never seen any proof of this, and even this very active proof happening all around me could be anything.
That's right. Sometimes denial can be a hell of a thing.
Kayla, what about you? You have just the one POV as well, who's just really thrown into a whole situation.
Yeah, and I feel like it's kind of important to talk about, like, as a professional author, to talk about things that you like don't know how to do and like things that you're learning and stuff like that. So I don't know how to do multiple POVs. I've never tried it before. So like I was like, okay, this would benefit from having like a split like Peter Pan, Wendy sort of thing, but like I can't really do that. But in regards to Wendy, the character, and how I made her, I had two things that I really wanted to do. She is a like very airheaded suburban girl who's very sweet and like trusting and full of adventure and stars in her eyes. And there aren't very many like portrayals of like young Black women who are like that, like girls, like we're spunky and we can handle stuff and whatever, but just being like just a little bit stupid, like a little bit airheaded, like that's not something we really have the grace to be allowed to do, really. So I wanted that. And then I also wanted her to be a character that's like scared in a way that's not reactive, because that's also a thing that we aren't really shown. So like when Peter's off doing just being absolutely out of pocket, she's just sitting there just like that. And I just wanted that to be kind of a really funny and unique aspect of a character that I personally haven't seen, even with, you know, a lot of my contemporaries. I just wanted her to be there, you know. But as for me personally, like I am a person who is ready for danger. The Jumanji theme is in the back of my head whenever I'm anywhere dark. I have fists of fury, I'm ready to fight. So like, you know, I'm not somebody who would make a lot of the decisions that Wendy would make, because I would be way more efficient about getting home and being safe. But I really wanted this character to exhibit the kind of like open-heartedness and, you know, wonder, curiosity as Wendy from the original book, and the danger that she allowed herself to get into because she was so willing to be trusting and so willing to be ready to open her heart to all of the magic that she was experiencing.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, she literally like a boy crawls into her room to try to rob her, and she's like, well, guess I'll go with you.
He's cute.
So Kayla, you're saying though that you are a great candidate to go spend the night on the air mattress at the haunted house.
I think that's what she's saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm very, very capable. I'm crazy strong, and I can throw a javelin, and I'm good at archery. So like I'm a fighting girl. So
Yeah.
I'd
bet on you.
Not the best weapon against ghosts.
Not the best.
I guess I don't know for sure.
You got to be crafty if you want to be safe. You could put some, I don't know, little scripture things and throw it at them, so you don't have to get close.
I love this.
Like, we'll be safe. I'll keep you safe.
This is good. Now we know Kayla is the human embodiment of that John Mulaney bit that's like street smuts.
Literally exactly that. Thank you.
It's funny. I was gonna steal a question that actually Danielle Clayton was watching last night's panel and asked, which I thought was fascinating, which was, do you think you'd survive in your world? I'm curious if you think you'd survive in each other's worlds as well. Like Karen and Sarah, sounds like you would just avoid the situations entirely.
I would not survive. I would be that first body, you know, that just washes up on the shore and everyone's like, oh no, that's so sad. I guess there's a murderer in town. That would be my role.
I love it.
That's a good role. They're always saddest about the first body. Sarah, do you think you'd follow Peter Pan out the window and into the horrors of the night?
Well, one time a guy snuck up behind me in an art store, and I had my back to him, and I punched him in the balls without actually turning around. So I'm gonna go no. I don't think I would. I don't even think I would follow like the cutest girl out of a window into the night. I would have a lot of questions.
See, this is good. Teens watching, follow the examples of our authors, not our characters. Except for Karen's. Don't wash.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah,
don't do that.
Avoid that one. But follow her instinct to just not be involved in the situation in the first place. So of course your characters don't find themselves in these situations alone. All of them have really strong friend groups, whether it's our main trio and You'll Be the Death of Me, Dare's fellow interns and The Girls Are Never Gone, and even like Tinkerbell and the Lost Boys in Darling, although their motives in being Wendy's friend are sometimes more unclear. What made you want to include these strong friendships in your book? And I'm curious what purpose you think friendships like this serve in thriller and horror. Let's start with Sarah.
All right. So first part was what made me want to include friendships.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, gosh, friendship has always been, I don't know, extremely important to me. So, and especially when you're facing something really hard, I think you need a few good friends around. Of course, Dare also has her dog, Waffles.
Yes.
So friends and creatures, very important. But yeah, especially as I've gotten older, oh my gosh, I've realized you need your friends. Friends are life. So I really did want to highlight the strong friendships in the book and spend a lot of time establishing those. Yeah. And then what was the second part?
What purpose do you think that like friend groups like that serve in horror and thriller? Because when you look at like movies and stuff like that too, you like always get that like this is the group and we're all gonna die, but you know.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's their purpose. Bodies. No, I'm oh my god. Well, I think that one reason that I had Dare's friends around was to present those, we talked about this a little earlier, present opposing points of view. Because Dare has her skepticism, but Quinn, one of her friends in the story, is a big believer. And then there's Holly, who's sort of like, well, I'm kind of open-minded. And so you get all these different perspectives on what's going on by having the friend group be close.
Yeah, I love that. Kayla, you have the more unique friend situation, I'd say, out of the three, and that no one really knows who's friends and who isn't.
Yes. One of the things that I'm really into writing is just ensemble casts. I just like lots of kids hanging out with each other. And another thing that is kind of like a staple of my work is highlighting the way that teams support each other and the resilience that they have in the face of danger. I feel like, even if the solutions they come up with aren't the best or, what have you, they're always trying. And I think it's important to honor that desire to try and that desire to help each other. But the original book really focused a lot on community and what different communities looked like. They had the community of the family of the Darlings, the community of the Lost Boys, the community of the Braves, and just like the community of the Pirates, and like how within each individual group, regardless of how they felt about each other, the other groups, they all really loved each other and their love for each other was palpable. So when I was writing Darling, I really wanted to showcase the love of the homeless and parentless children and how they had recreated the structure of a nuclear family among a group of exclusively boys under the age of 17. And then when Wendy meets some other kids who are her age, which I replaced as the Braves, I replaced it with, just children. The way that they are about their friendship is significantly more regular. It's more normal. Yeah. It's more healthy. They're like, my parents are wondering where I am. I can only stay out until 1 a.m. Like their vibe versus like Peter's children in his house, who are very, very different. And I really wanted to create this clear division between the people that Wendy would assume would help her and the people that Wendy would assume might harm her, and how at the end of the day, they're all just teenagers, they're all in danger, and they all want the situation to stop. So I thought that was a really cool way to kind of like illustrate and honor that original aspect of the original book.
Yeah, I love that. Karen, what about you? With your multi-POV, you kind of really get in the heads of everyone in your friend group.
Yeah. And I think, if you're writing for teens, that's a huge part of their lives. Your friend group at that age is just as important as your family. And I think it's a way in, for a lot of your readers to either see their own friendships reflected or maybe see like some aspirational friendships or some toxic friendships that they, might want to avoid. So there's that aspect, is just really trying to reflect the life of my audience. But also I think it just gives so much depth to the story. When I'm writing a mystery, it's not just about who done it. It's about how are we going to figure this out? And they can never figure it out without working together. And usually that means like overcoming some kind of issue in their relationship or some kind of issue in their personal lives. And they need each other, even if they drive each other crazy sometimes. So that's always a really fun dynamic for me to write.
Yeah, and that of course is something that's become like a trademark of you, are these groups of friends who there's just a lot of murder happening.
It just happens, it happens.
Happens to the best of us. So although Karen, yours is the most like traditional mystery, all of your books contain at least some element of mystery to it, which means that you must be going into these books, I assume, with some sort of plan. So I'm curious what the plotting process looked like for the books. If you knew like your big twists going into the writing, or if you discovered those along the way. Kayla, why don't you kick us off, because you kind of had a plot to draw from more than anyone else. Oh, you're still muted.
All right. Okay. So I have really bad ADHD, as you can tell from the way that I talk and my hands and face. So I very, very need to create the discipline for myself kind of artificially. It doesn't come naturally to me. So in order to even be an author, even finish a project, I need to have extraordinarily tight outlines that are very detailed. And I actually do 3 outlines. The first one is the plot from beginning to end, just saying what's happening. The second one is a critical analysis of the text, like you would do in school about a book that we didn't write. I would write, why certain things mean certain things, how certain things relate to the original book, and I would just kind of like deconstruct it as like a literary text, as though it is separate from myself. And then the final one would just be a plotting of the way that I want my audience to feel while they are consuming my work. So I'll start out and talk about how I want the beginning to go, what emotions I want to invoke with, the eventual climax, the resolution, how I want them to feel when they close the book and they take that deep breath. I want to have that all structured in that specific way. And then when I'm going through and writing the thriller, I'll go back and check both of those outlines to make sure that I'm being that I'm honoring the original intention that I created for the work. So a lot of the times when people are reading my books, there's this like feeling of like a pull towards the end. And that is something that I designed specifically for my work ahead of time before I write a single word of the actual text.
That's fascinating. I've never heard of anyone doing it like that. And I'm very intrigued by it. I want to try it now.
It's accessibility work.
Yeah, right. Have you always done it that way? Like when you were sitting down to like do your first book, you're like, this is how I must approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do, I have like a waning and waxing writing gears. So I will write all of the plots for all of the books that I will write for the next 5 to 6 years in 1 year. So I wrote all of the plots for The Way to the Stars, The Wicker King, Darling, and a train heist novel that I have due next month in 2013. And then last year, I wrote the plots for all of the books that I have on sale. One of them just sold for like 2028. So I have to create these things in order to make it so that I can actually do work. And it absolutely is an accessibility device for myself.
I love that. Yeah, people in the comments are saying that they are going to try that. So thank you for sharing that. Karen, what about you?
I usually start with sort of like, that big idea that I can sum up in a sentence that doesn't actually mean that much, like Ferris Bueller's Day Off with Murder, or, with the cousins, it was grandmother contacts out of the blue. And so little things like, it's just a big idea, but I don't know what it means. And then I think about like who's in the room, or who's part of this and why. And I think a lot about, the connectivity between the characters. I think about each of their individual journeys. I think about each of their individual secrets, because usually they have a secret and that has something to do with why they are part of this. And then I start getting into the plot, and I do sort of that headlights, method where I know what the end is usually. Sometimes it changes. I don't always know how I'm going to get there, but I plot out the beginning, how I get to the inciting incidents. I use a beat sheet, so I know, okay, my midpoint is X and my climax is Y. And now I just have to sort of think about how I get there, but I'll worry about that later. Let me write the first 3 to 6 chapters and get a feel for these people, like move them around like a little pawns on a chessboard. And then I can look at what I've done and flesh out that outline. So the mystery, I don't know all the twists and turns when I start. That comes to me as I get to know them and I start thinking more deeply about what's really happening and, how can I misdirect, and how can I give someone what looks like a motive but is actually quite innocent, and those sort of things tend to come as I work.
Do you usually know who you're like, not everything in your book is murder, specifically in your various books, but do you tend to know like who the murderer is from the beat sheets and things?
Usually. I always think I know, but it has changed.
Ooh.
Sometimes I get a part way through and think, you know what, this would be better. And it's usually someone who's going to be a red herring. And then I think, nah, they should actually do it.
I want to ask you which books the murder is changed for, but I feel like that's information you probably can't share with us.
I cannot.
Well,
I can say, because I've said this a lot publicly, To Can Keep a Secret, I rewrote 3 times.
Wow.
Because that was a really hard book to write. It was my second book, and second books are hard. And I changed the murderer every single time. So if it seems like everyone in that book is suspicious, it's because at one point they probably did it.
Wow.
That's so funny. I love that. I will say, though, it clearly worked. I hand sell that book at the store all the time. And I always say, I read this book like years ago, and I still think about the last line when I'm lying in bed alone sometimes, and a shiver runs up my spine. It is one of my favorite last lines in books. Read the rest of the book first if you haven't. Don't just skip to the last line, but like, it's you nailed it.
And that wasn't there, for a long time. Even once I figured out who done it, it was one of those back and forth with my editor where she's like, I think it just needs to be a little darker at the end, a little darker. I'm like, okay, how about this? How about this? How about this? And she's like, so then I knew we were good.
Yes, I love that. Sarah, what about you? Because this is especially this is your first non-fantasy, at least. So you still had twists, but not this extent of like a horror mystery.
Right. So my process with those fantasy books was a lot like exactly what Karen said, where I would know, where I had used a beat sheet, where I knew ahead of time, like for the Reign of the Fallen series, I knew what my midpoint was, and I knew what the climax was. And I did pretty much know the ending for Reign of the Fallen. And so coming into this, I thought, because I read a lot of horror and I love ghost stories, that I could just write it and it'd be great. No. So I wrote it. And I wrote it what I wanted. And my editor read it. And she came back. She was like, so Sarah, this is like way too dark. And I was like, oh. And it also wasn't that twisty yet. So what I ultimately, before I went back and rewrote the whole book, I took a look and I went chapter by chapter. I figured out what was the purpose behind the haunting. I went ahead and built out my mystery, and I did use a very detailed chapter by chapter outline, which is something I've never done before. And I tend to enjoy about the act of writing, surprising myself, like Karen was saying. So that was a little tougher. But I think the book came out a lot better for it in the end. So, yeah.
What did you do? So if you were used to finding your joy in the discovery, what did you do with the outline to find the joy in the writing that time?
Oh, that's a great question.
And the answer shouldn't be I hated it, because that's too sad.
No, I didn't hate it. I didn't hate it. No, I would say, I got to know my characters again and everything. I think that was the fun in it for me, was getting to know my characters, was also digging into having the mystery already laid out. I was able to, since I had that in my head, I was able to weave in really cool specific things with the haunting. I was able to let that inform what was going on with the ghost, make certain moments spookier, and also just dig into the setting more to use that as a character. And all of that was a lot of fun. So it was not a bad thing.
No, the atmosphere.
I wasn't allowed to kill everyone. Everybody died at the end before. I mean, for the most part. So it was not good. I mean, not the dog. I would never kill an animal in a book. I don't do that. So
and I appreciate that.
But right.
That should be on the cover of the book. Just heads up. There is a good dog in here. Doesn't die.
I picked up a YA where the dog died in the book, and I was like, I put it down. I left it. We were at the beach. I left it at the beach house. I was like, this is a free book for someone else's library because I can't do this. No.
You Wishbone Frankenstein it. I get it.
I did.
Yeah.
I absolutely did. I binned it.
I feel guilty about that for months afterwards, but I was just like, I can't have Wishbone scariness in my house. So I'm not gonna lie, I feel like I've implied this a lot. I'm such a wimp, gang. I write contemporary romance, and I love a thriller, but I get very freaked out by them. So I was very stressed out while reading all of your books. It was in a good way, obviously, but a good thriller or horror really gets the blood and adrenaline pumping. So it wasn't a problem for me to be caught up in those feelings for the few hours it took me to race through each of these. But it's a very different thing to write the book and to be in those feelings for months at a time. And so I'd love to hear more about how you manage your own headspace while writing books with such heightened stakes and emotions. Sarah, I'm just gonna we'll snake again.
Okay. All right. So, honestly, I really enjoy dark things. So for me, I find it fun. It's not stressful to me. I actually find horror really comforting. It's very comforting to me to see what people can endure, what they can survive, how people respond when they're pushed to their limits. Like, I find it incredibly comforting. That's like my bread and butter. I love it so much. So even though those scenarios are haunting and disturbing, I have a blast. Like, for me, if you can make me scared to go to the bathroom by myself at 3 o'clock in the morning, you deserve a prize. Like, you've done wonders. Like, I'm just dark and creepy. I think that's the takeaway.
That's fair. Great. That works out really well for you, though. So here we are. Karen, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of similar to Sarah. I've always liked dark stories. I like the original fairy tales, like the Grimm's fairy tales. That was what I read when I was a kid, so that probably shaped me in a, interesting way. But in my books, I always have a combination of light and dark too. Like there's definitely the seriousness of the crime and the ripple effects that come from that. But there's also the relationships, there's some humor, there's some romance. And so for me, there's always a balance. And I find that enjoyable. I think for me, the hard part comes my head gets so full of these characters. It feels like they take over, especially because there's 3 of them or 4, and there's just a lot of them in my head. And it's really tough to pull myself out of that and go back to normal life when I'm drafting. It's sometimes I really lose time.
That's fair. Kayla, how about you? Still muted.
All right. I didn't want anybody to hear me drinking water. So. Anyway, one of the things that I really like from my own work, whether it's for negative emotions or positive emotions, is designing a lot of the tapestry of feeling that I want my audience to feel for emotions that we don't quite have words for in the English language, the kind of rarer in between emotions. I think those hit a little bit harder than just sad, angry, scared, whatever. So when I was writing Darling, I really wanted to clue in on something that is very specific about unease, just unease by itself. And I think the scene that was the most emotionally evocative for me to write was a scene where Peter leaves the group and all of the kids start talking really seriously about what's going on and stuff like that. And they're saying stuff that they didn't want Peter to hear. And then Peter comes back and everybody picks up like they're talking about a completely different subject, just rehearsed, just completely different subject. Somebody says a joke that, nobody was really planning to hear and everybody laughs. And Wendy is sitting there looking at everybody and understanding that their coordination in that moment is significantly more terrifying than anything else she's seen that night, because it tells her just the amount of danger that she's in and just the amount of planning that she has unwittingly stumbled into. And her sitting there watching all of their faces with their eyes in terror and their mouths in smiles as they pretend to laugh to take the attention off of whatever it was that they were talking about when Peter was in there. The terror of that moment is very unique feeling. So I really want to create those kind of, those ooh moments for my readers.
I love that. Did you find yourself caught up in that ooh moment, or were you able to separate it pretty well?
Kind of a little bit caught up in it, because in order to really kind of write these feelings that aren't expressed particularly often, you have to remind yourself what they felt like and what things, the physiological reactions of your body to these in-between emotions to describe, what it is that makes them terrifying.
I love that. I'm scared by it, but I love it. Sorry, my tabs are being weird. So here's a question that is particularly interesting to ask of thriller and horror writers. I want to hear what were some of the wildest things you researched in preparation for these books. Because your average book, sure, you come across some weird things, but there's a lot of murder and death in the various things we've written here. Karen, our murder and death queen of the evening, why don't you kick us off?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, you definitely have to figure that the browser history of a thriller and mystery writer could absolutely attract the attention of the FBI under different circumstances. And you just hope when they catch sight of you, they realize what you're up to. But I don't know. All kinds of weird stuff, like how long does it take for poison to kill you? How much poison do you need to have? Like, how do you mask poison? How deep do you have to dig to bury a body? All of it.
A lot of poison specific stuff.
Extremely incriminating. Yeah.
But it's because you already said on the call that you would never be involved in a murder.
Right. So that is my alibi right there.
Yeah, there you go. Airtight. Sarah, what about you? Obviously, some of your research came from experience.
Well, so some of it was that, and then some of it was I had to Google a lot of stuff about bodies decaying in water.
Ooh.
There's a lake. The house is by a lake, and so the lake plays into the haunting. And so I would say that was like the grossest stuff that I researched. And then the mundane side was researching how water would impact the house, like because the house is falling down, it's flooding, all these things are going on. So I did also research, and I researched like restoring old houses. So I did some mundane research too. It's nice. It's a good balance.
That's good. That's important.
Yeah.
Kayla, what about you? What sort of horrifying Chicago raves did you look into?
Honestly, I did the most amount of research was like kind of boring isn't really the word. When you're going to do like an IP that's so old and treasured, stuff like that, I personally feel like it's very respectful to spend a lot of time reading the research that people have done before you about that subject, like analyzing it. So I read a lot of like queer theory Peter Pan, feminist reading Peter Pan, you know, a lot of people's undergrad theses, their master's theses. This is what I think about Peter Pan in exploration of childhood, Peter Pan in delayed onset of childhood, Peter Pan in the representation of delayed onset puberty and aging, things like that, about that people have put significant amounts of work into to learn about that, because I know that whenever a new Peter Pan book comes out, those people are reading it because they care about it so much that they did all that work. So I don't want to let them down. So I spent almost all of my time researching that. And then the rest of the like little experiences, the places that they go, the, you know, the train, just everything that they do are all things that I've experienced as a person who lives in Chicago. And I think, you know, the original book, I think it's set in London. Everything about the way that the world is presented very much takes into account the time and space in which the book was written. So I wanted to honor that by making it from an area that I was familiar with, because I easily could have done New York. I could have done New York, but it wouldn't have felt as authentic, you know, to the grimy city thing. And when I pitched the book, I pitched it as Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, but Nick and Nora's Infinite Police Procedural. So I really wanted to do that. I think the weirdest thing that I had to research was the environment of like 1980s roller discos, because there's a scene where the mom talks about her experience being young and being in the city, that she's warning her daughter not to do stuff that she eventually does. And it's just about her having a night similar to the night in the book, and about how horrifying that night ended for her, and having that, like, you know, very Stranger Things poppy kind of, you know, 80s that isn't really like the 80s feel of that, and putting that into the mom's description of what her life was like in Chicago was the fun research.
Oh, that's cool. Also, apologies if my camera has started moving around. The cat has come in and has decided to bump her head against the computer as much as she can. So we're going to try to restrain her with pets, but apologies if I'm doing a bit of a Blair Witch on my end. It's entirely on her. So we do have an audience question that I want to pull in. And if anyone else watching has questions as well, pop them into the comments, and I can pull some of them in to chat with our authors about. Caroline Schwartzbeck is asking, what inspired you to write YA thriller instead of adult thriller or horror? And I forgot that I was supposed to point to people. Sarah, why don't you start us off again?
Okay. You know, I will say, Caroline, that I've thought about it. And it's definitely something I would consider doing in the future. But the reason that I choose to write YA thriller and horror instead is because of how much I enjoy YA. That's the real difference. It's not so much about the genre. It's about how much I enjoy that age group. I really love writing YA. For a number of reasons. I mean, and I'm sure you're familiar with some of them, but like, there's so much that's possible at that age, and that's really magical. So I just love writing YA.
Awesome. Karen?
Yeah, I mean, you know, purely from like a logistical point of view, it was a young adult book that inspired me to start writing again. And part of the reason it inspired me, not only because it was a great story, but I remember the very specific voice really struck me. And so many times I'll read a book and really enjoy it, and they'll think, oh, I could never write that. And for some reason, something about that voice made me think, I really enjoy this, and maybe I could write that. You know, there's something about the young adult voice, the immediacy, the emotion. I thought I could channel that. And it turns out I feel like I do have a voice that's very well suited to that age category, which is not to say I would not potentially go up. I wouldn't go down. I don't think I'm suited to middle grade, but I could see
Very
myself
dark
doing
middle grade.
yeah, maybe, but even just the voice is so specific in middle grade. I would have to read a lot more, first of all. But I love reading adult thrillers. I think that's something I might like to try down the road. But for now, I'm having a terrific time writing young adult. And like Sarah says, it's just such a fascinating time of life. You know, there are so many firsts that you're experiencing. You're figuring out who you are, who you want to be. And that's a really rich narrative space.
Yeah. What about you, Kayla?
I am a teacher's daughter, so of course I like to teach. And I really like the aspect of being somebody who works in children's media, who gets to think about, you know, the kids of today, the kind of adults that we want them to grow up into, the sort of lessons that we want to impart to them. And there's an aspect to being a children's book author where you have to kind of consider the type of kids that might not have adults in their life that would provide them with certain things to talk about, to think about, or lessons that might actually help them. And I really enjoy being in a position to spend time designing the kind of work that will build the adults that we can be proud of. So, you know, with Darling, the overhead lesson is just slightly related to a spoiler for the book, very much focuses on what type of boys as a young girl you should allow to have around you. The features that the love interest has and the features that Peter has, the shiny aspects of Peter's personality and the more stable, more healthy, more reliable aspects of the eventual love interest, and like what things Wendy learns in her experiences with these two characters. Like, I wish somebody had talked to me about that, or I had something that I had read that told me about these things before I had to experience them rough style, like completely out of control style. And, you know, even though a lot of my books are just kind of like these weird esoteric topics, not really like set up to be lesson books, because those do exist and they're very important and stuff like that. I really want to be able to at least give of myself, you know, of what I've learned in my short 30 years about how to be a good person and how to keep yourself safe.
If you can convince one girl to not climb out of a window after a boy who has climbed into her window, it will be worth it. So I'd love to, obviously, horror thriller is such a rich genre in YA right now, and I would love to hear what other books you all would recommend for people who love your books. And just to make it fair, we don't need to do the thing where we all go around saying each other's books on the panel. You should all read everyone's books on the panel. So that's taken care of. Karen, why don't you start us off?
Oh, I knew you were going to start with me, and I was going to Google the book I read because I can't remember it. It was really good.
Do you need me to come back to you?
Yeah, come back to me.
Okay, Sarah, you're in the hot seat.
Okay, I'm in the hot seat. Shoot. Okay, well, I was going to recommend The Hunting Wives. That is an adult thriller, however. So, but I'll recommend it anyway. The Hunting Wives is super twisty and very exciting, and it's just freshly on my mind because I just finished it. And then a recent horror rec, I'll just throw one of those out there too. The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones is wild. Wow. Animal horror, though, so content warning.
Yeah, I think some of the people in the comments who loved that your dogs always survive might have a hard time.
Yeah, that one, don't, because I had to set it aside for a month and come back to it, but it's a really good book.
Fair enough. Kayla, we'll hop up to you.
Sure, I'll be quick because I see somebody else has a question. I highly recommend Feed by M.T. Anderson. It is the most horrifying and also disgusting book I've ever read. It's sci-fi horror. It's about people with computers in their brains that control things, that they can control things with, kind of like having the internet in their brain. It's just absolutely horrifying. And the stress and fear of the book really creeps up on you slowly to like this crescendo at the end that like I see it as an adult 20 years later in bookstores and feel like a shiver. And then the second thing I want to recommend is actually a fan fiction. It is a Castlevania fan fiction. It is called Baba, and it is the best portrayal of Baba Yaga that I've ever read in my entire life. It is clearly written by somebody who is professional and hiding, and it is a horror. There's not that much romance in it. It's literally just about the three main characters being menaced by Baba Yaga, and it is gorgeously written, and I highly recommend it. And it's free.
So if anyone on this panel secretly wrote that fan fiction, you have to say something now. You must reveal yourself.
But yeah, it's
I
just
don't know, but I love
Got it.
Pennsylvania, so I'm going to check it out. That's
Me
awesome.
That's so fun. Okay, Karen, we've come back around.
I remembered. Okay. So I was trying to palate cleanse a little while ago because I had just finished, one of my own books and I was burnt out on horror and thriller and everything. And I also wanted to just go outside of YA for a little bit. So I read the new book. It's not actually out until May, but by Christina Lauren, who writes adult contemporary romance.
I've read
Super
this one.
swoony and sweet and fun, called Something Wilder. And it was so good. Highly recommend it. But all of their books are good. It's like an author duo. And I also recently read and just did an event with Saba Tahir for her new book, All My Rage, which is phenomenal. Saba is really well known as a fantasy author. She wrote the Ember in the Ashes series, but she went to contemporary for this book. And it's just stunning and heartfelt and funny and fabulous. So absolutely worth a read.
I love that. Yeah, great, Rex. Yeah, Christina Lauren was the Unhoneymooners, one of their earlier books, was the first thing I could read once COVID hit, like 3 months in.
It is just feel good writing. So that's what I was looking for, and it delivered.
Yeah. So once you've all if you do on a binge and you read everyone's books on the panels, and you're like, those were so good, but also I can't sleep anymore. Pull in a Christina Lauren. I will toss in a recommendation as well. I just read The Amazing What We Harvest by Anne Freistad, which is like an environmental horror. Just came out on Tuesday, and we did her launch at the bookstore. And it's absolutely fabulous. We've got signed books at the store. So Anne Kaminsky in the comments has the same next question that I did. So great minds, Anne. Great job. They say, you all may not be able to talk about these, but what is coming up next? Which is also what I'd love to hear about. And we will go, Karen. I'm gonna try you first, Dean, because I feel like you probably at least know this one.
I do know that. Yes. So also over my shoulder, but lower, is the advanced reader copy of Nothing More to Tell, which is my 6th book, and that's coming out in August 30th of this year. And that is the story of a teen journalist who investigates the cold case murder of her favorite teacher, whose body was found by her ex-best friend turned enemy. So that was a really fun one to write. And at the moment, I'm also working on revisions for One of Us is Back, which is going to be the 3rd and final book in the One of Us is Lying series. And that's coming out in 2023.
Yes. Good. Please. More of that into my veins.
Just
all the time.
Keep them coming.
Yes. I need like an IV drip just set up of those books. Kayla, do we have coming up next for you?
Yes, I actually have 2 books in that weird contract stage. So they've sold, but I have a Frankenstein book about necromancy. That's pretty cool.
Ooh, you and Sarah should talk.
Yes. And then I have another book called Icarus that is like an Icarus Helios modern mythology type thing. It is about this boy and his father who do art heists on this one super rich guy who lives in their town, and they steal art out of his house, reproduce the art inside of their house, and then put the fake art back in his house and sell his art on the black market. And it's about how Icarus meets his son Helios, who lives in his house, and they fall in love, and it's really cute. So that's what's next.
I love it. Such good stable families and situations in all of your books, Kayla. Just regular people doing regular things.
Yeah, everybody's happy.
And Sarah, what do we have for you?
So I write across age ranges. So
I have coming up, right?
I have 3 picture books coming out. And then I also have a middle grade nonfiction that's coming out. That's all about the weird, fun history of birthstones. And then as far as other middle grade and YA, can't really talk about anything, but paranormal, ghosty stuff forthcoming at some point. Yeah.
Yes, I, for one, am very excited about that middle grade birthstone book. When that popped up in the catalog, I was like, yes, this is what I would have consumed wildfire as a child. That's gonna be really fun.
I had a blast researching all that stuff. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, that unfortunately is about all the time that we have. But thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for everyone for watching. We do, like I said, have one more panel, our keynote panel with Julie Murphy tomorrow, which you can watch if you have the link for this. You'll get the link for that one as well. But tell your friends to register as well so they can have the links. And you can buy books from all of our lovely authors along with signed book plates at the link that we popped into the top of the comments there. Rosie, if you want to pop that in again, just to make sure that appears. I'm still always unclear on how YouTube comments work. Anything else that the rest of you want to add before we finish off? We'll go in the original order. Kayla?
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. This is my third year. It's been wonderful, and it was wonderful to see you both again because we were on the same year.
Yes. Karen?
Yeah, same. This was one of the first conferences I went to in person, I think. And it's just really nice to come back, even virtually. And thanks to everyone who watched.
Yes. And Sarah?
I think this was my third Nova Teen. And I mean, it's always been my favorite festival. It was one of the first ones I ever did. So obviously special place in my heart. Met some of my best author friends there too. So really good memories. And this was really fun. This was a really nice way to kind of wrap up the week.
Yes, it is always so wonderful to see. So many of our authors of Nova Teen have gone on to become these like huge, amazing, fabulous authors writing all sorts of things. Like we had all of you here for like Kayla, it was your first book. Karen, was your first book. Sarah, was it your first book as well that we had you here for?
I think so.
I think so. Yeah. And now look at you all thriving. Just killing it. So thank you all so much. And for the rest of you, have a great rest of your night, afternoon, morning, if you're watching this later, and happy reading. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.